Welcome to the Shun Podcast, where we expose religions that use shunning as a tool to control people. Some quick business before we get started. As you know by now, I offer one-on-one coaching to help people recover from life in these high control groups. I work to help people grieve the past, find themselves, and then find a life that they actually want, not just the one they were given. I'm actually offering something special, so if you want to work with me, now would be a good time. I'm actually offering pay what you want pricing. That's not something you see very often, but I want to work with more people. I want to try to help more people. So, when you look at it, traditional therapy locally is usually $100 plus per session. Online therapy is usually $80 or more. I typically charge $50 for coaching, which most people find reasonable, but I'm actually letting you decide the price. So the minimum is actually $20, but you decide from there. And by doing so, I'm hoping that I can help more people. So if you're feeling unhappy or stuck, send me an email at shunnedpodcast@gmail.com or reach out through any of the websites that I have, whether it's shunnedpodcast.com, ex-JWhelp.com, or whatever. And let's start working together. We already lost so much time in these groups. You can certainly do some healing alone, of course. But, when we work together on things, we can often heal a lot faster. And, we can also process things together, challenge perspectives, get new tools, find ways of different ways of looking at things, find acceptance, kind of go through this grieving process together. And in the end, more and more people have been reaching out for help, and seeing people that I work with actually start to find their voice, to make big changes in their lives, to be who they've wanted to be, or to just be proud of who they are. That's the best feeling in the world. Speaking of seeing people become who they are, or be able to speak to who they've been, today we actually have another brave person that's reached out to tell their story as part of the process of healing. It can be very cathartic to share your story with other people, to feel seen, heard, validated. So let's go on a journey with today's guest. As you listen, look for the lessons, look for the ways that maybe your story relates, and maybe you can learn about what has worked for this person, or maybe what hasn't. Maybe it's something that you can pull into your own life. If you were never involved in these groups, I get emails from people that just listen because they find these stories interesting or they find them inspiring. So please help spread the word. These aren't just cult stories. These are human stories. So many of the things that were experienced by the guests of this show are found in other areas of life. So share these episodes and let's help shine a light on the human experience. What's really going on in this world? You never know who it might help. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet today's guest.
My name is Chelsea. I'm 28 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
All right, Chelsea. So how'd you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I am third generation born in.
Okay. Do you know how it started in your family at all?
The story is kind of not super clear for me, but my grandmother on my mom's side, she was married, I think, and the marriage wasn't that great, and she came in and brought her family in, and she had a really hard childhood. Like, the mom was abusive and things like that, and she's in a rough marriage, so she came in, and essentially she had like 9 brothers and sisters. I think that number could be wrong, but I think it was 9, and she brought almost half of her family in with her. So
Wow.
thanks, Grandma. Yeah, a lot of her sisters ended up following suit, if not right away, then shortly after.
Yeah, it's oftentimes it takes one spark, right? One person in the family picks it up, and then you watch it spread. So with the fact that it goes back so many generations, 3 generations in this, I don't know, does that mean anything to you in particular? Do you have this, history? Does that impact you today in any way, or did that create a lot of pressure for you since it did go back a few generations?
My childhood, my parents that raised me, they were so wishy-washy. There were so many instances where they were quote unquote, in the truth, and then also where they were inactive and,
Mm.
living their best life. Um, so it was never really, and my grandmother herself, I mean, she was married a couple times, and it was never really like, um, super truth robots until later on
Okay.
in my life.
Okay, okay. I understand what you're saying. We'll get into that as we talk. Um,
Yeah.
so then, what was the worldview that it gave you? You know, growing up as a child, when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses being born in, it can impact the way you see the world around you. So, how did you feel about things?
I had the basic, no worldly friends at school. Everybody's gonna die in Armageddon. It's storming outside and you're terrified because, Armageddon's coming and all of that. I I was a little bitter even as a child because my mom um met my biological father in the Kingdom Hall in that kind of like circle of people. And then well, he was, I don't know, like 18 or something, and she was like 15. So, her mom ended up like pressing charges on him, and it was just over. Like, I never knew my dad.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was very like hush hush in the congregations. Like, the congregations put themselves in the middle of it and basically like shielded me from that side of my family just because they had all written him off. And I guess it's statutory rape, but everybody
Mhm.
kind of like was like, we're going to respect what Chelsea's mom wants and not let, I would go to the Kingdom Hall and I would see my grandparents that were from my dad's side, and they would always try and talk to me, and it was like people built like a force. Like, it was so divisive, and I don't understand how they got away with that, to be honest. But um we it was a hard thing for me to try to understand, and it was always kind of like they would use Jehovah, like, Jehovah built this better life for you over here. I don't know how to explain it, but it was just really, everything was in the name of Jehovah, even if it was like some backwards stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That so you're saying so your mom's mom pressed charges on your biological father for
Hmm.
statutory rape. Did he go to jail or anything?
He did. Yep.
Whoa. Whoa.
That
In the congregation,
actually,
and then you were going to the same congregation as like what, like his parents?
yeah. So
Oh.
I'm just gonna get into the nitty gritty here. My mom remarried, or not, yeah, because she did marry my biological dad, like after the fact. She decided she wanted to be with him and nobody was gonna stop her. So she married him. Um, I think she got disfellowshipped for, having relations with him or whatever. Married him. It didn't last long because, in her defense, she was trying to shield me from my father, who had, some issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, didn't last long. So she got reinstated and right away met my stepdad, who ended up raising me, and got married. They were like 18 or 19. And that was my dad. Like, I was to call him dad. Everybody in the congregation acknowledged that was my dad. And so it went on for a little bit like that. And my mom had another daughter with him. And I don't know if maybe postpartum wasn't taken seriously or what happened, but she ended up meeting a guy online and leaving me and my little sister with my stepdad. And so I was kind of raised by one of my aunts quite a bit during this time, and my stepdad took care of my sister. But even in that time, the congregation supported my stepdad, having adopted me and like wouldn't let me see my grandparents. And it was just like a big old mess. Like I was kept from that side of my family when my own mother wasn't even there. Like she left me with my stepdad. So it was just like none of it made any sense. And you can't make sense of that when you're like 6, 7 years old.
Yeah.
But I just knew that there were these people, like, because my biological side of my dad's family, I'm decently close to them now. I mean, of course, they're in Michigan, but none of it made any sense that I would have his sisters trying to come up and talk to me and my grandparents trying to come up and talk to me. And I wasn't allowed to talk to them. And these people that were in the congregation all protected my stepdad and his family and like took me away from talking to them. Like it was very strange. And so it ended up when my mom and my stepdad got back together, she came back from, her little tryst. And she was disfellowshipped. But when she came back, they decided to work it out that she had just had her moment or whatever. And we ended up moving like 3 hours away from there and going to a new congregation. And that was kind of their way to like sweep all of that under the rug.
Wow, yeah, that's almost, you just see the denial and all that. It's like, we're just not going to deal with any of this, and we're going to run away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then to also keep me from that side of my family as I got older, I think, because my stepdad, um, despite our differences of opinions, he always did the best that he could. And he really wanted to be that father figure for me. So I have to deal with my frustration of that entire situation while still giving him credit because he, I mean, stepped up like when my mom wasn't there. So, it's hard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, things like that are complicated, and you sometimes have to be able to hold multiple feelings at once. On one hand, yeah, he tried to step up and was probably the best father or stepfather that he could be. On the other hand, the whole thing is kind of, it's strange the way you were kept from certain family members, and it it really kind of gets to a deeper level how Jehovah's Witnesses almost view children like property.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this is
100%.
my
Yeah.
property now, and so this piece of property can't associate with you because we're afraid you're going to steal it. It's really strange. It's almost like the movie Apostasy at the end where the mother tries to steal the baby. And I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Right.
But if you haven't by now, I don't know what to say. But it's just like those types of things really do happen, and people like children are literally taken from families, even in the religion, and it's just creates a lot of harm, a lot of hurt feelings and dysfunction, and it really also is a symptom of a larger dysfunction of being in a cult,
Mm-hmm.
where people already don't have healthy ways of seeing one another. So I'm just sorry that happened in your family, because that would have had to have been very confusing for a child.
Yeah, it definitely just made me like, I always, from a young age, had this feeling of my family does not have their shit together. Like I just don't understand. Like it was always like my entire childhood up and down, and always in the name of Jehovah. It always defaults back to serve Jehovah to the fullest. And it's just like, I don't know if he really wants you to do it like that, but it was just so confusing.
Yeah, it's like you're a child and you're confused and you're looking to your parents for answers, and they're just saying, I don't know, go, do what Jehovah says, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a default there. So then let's talk about, so what was childhood like at home for you as a young Jehovah's Witness?
Um, so when we moved away, we'll go from there. We went to a congregation. It was predominantly younger people in the congregation, younger couples, married, of course, because there's no couple that's not married. But
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like, for the lack of a better term, it was kind of like a party congregation. Um, it was very, very, very relaxed. Um, do you remember when Halo came out? The
You're
video
talking about
game?
the video game? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like, my stepdad would have, like, these parties, and, like, everybody would bring over their setup and drink, and,
Oh
so it was
wow,
very
that's
relaxed.
a first person shooter game, right?
Yeah.
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 I
Um,
never played it in our congregation. I actually knew a ministerial servant who got in trouble for it. So,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So that's the kind of
It was
congregation.
a mess, yeah. So, we were hit or miss at the meetings, never field service. That was from probably age, like, 7 up. Things started getting a little bit more complicated. My stepdad is somewhat successful business owner, and sometimes I feel like business owners, especially, network within the congregation,
Oh yeah.
especially when it's a trade and it's a trade. So, when you're in that little network, somebody who knows somebody needs some work done.
Sure.
So I feel like that was a lot of it in that part of my life. I did have the little sister that they had made together. I also have three siblings from my dad's side, but I didn't know them yet.
Mm.
But I had the little sister, and my parents had hit a phase. Um, they had to have been like 24, 25, where they just partied nonstop. And it was other kind of in and out witnesses that would come over, but they would party, and they had a very tumultuous relationship because of everything that they had been through. Um, you know, the beginning of the marriage was somewhat rocky, and I think that there was a lot of resentment from that. I'll just say that I think, but I
Oh
don't know.
yeah. I mean, in the
Um,
end, they're getting married at 18, 19, and then there's your mom ran off and all that. It's there's a lot of things going on there. But getting married at 18 and 19, what do you're not likely to
yeah,
have a super healthy relationship.
you're not even a person yet. Like,
Nope.
it's so ridiculous. But so there was a lot. My stepdad went out of town a lot for work, because I mean, you know when you're an owner of that type of business, you have to go where you're contracted. So it was a lot of up and down, and a lot of stuff that I saw, like fighting, and, like, drunken fights are the worst. And there was a lot of that in our household, like, a lot. I used to, like, beg them to get divorced.
Hmm.
But I was taking care of my little sister while all this was happening. Um, and so that kind of went on for a few years, and I think what happened was a mix between, they knew that they weren't living the the way that they should be for that religion, mixed with their relationship, mixed with work. I think they just went an inactive status.
Hmm.
Um, and they had moved 3 hours away, so there wasn't really people who were hounding them, you know?
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say no pressure. When
Yeah.
you move away, I think that you really see that when people move away from their families, a lot of times, uh, and that pressure is released, they really aren't as quote unquote strong in the truth as they might have seemed prior when they were had that external pressure being applied to them.
Yeah, exactly. And so that progressed. It was kind of tumultuous. I mean, we had a decent um family life. Like, my stepdad always did everything, to take care of us. We did family vacations, and the decent stuff, but it was so confusing to see them living almost like miserably, to be together, and just everything that I had to take care of my sister, because she was like 3, 4, maybe 5 eventually. But everything that I kind of had to shield her from, I was acting like a parent. And And then at the same time, this went up through my middle school years. At the same time, I was not allowed to have friends. I was not allowed to celebrate the holidays, or, it's so frustrating because it's like, you're not a Jehovah's Witness. Like, I know what a Jehovah's Witness is supposed to be, so why do I have to act like one? You know?
Yeah, your parents are living it up and acting wild,
Hmm.
while you're being the adult taking care of their child,
Yeah.
and you aren't allowed to be a kid.
Yeah, and my little sister was so young, and she's like the golden child now, and she's in the truth and married in the truth, and she's so strong in the truth. And I'm just like, well, she didn't see anything. Like, she doesn't know, but I'm not bitter. It's fine. Um, but no. So then, yeah, I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but or
That's
I
okay.
am.
Okay, okay.
Um, Yeah, so that was up through middle school that they acted like that. And but I was always, you tell your teachers you're a Jehovah's Witness, you don't salute the flag, which I was a rebel from birth. Like, I would salute the flag, I would eat the birthday, like
Oh,
I
really?
never yes. The only
Good for
thing that
you.
ever scared me was like Armageddon, because when you're a kid and that's ingrained in your head, you're like, oh shit, I ate the birthday cupcake, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
But
So what made you so afraid of Armageddon? What was it for you? Was it, the imagery that you had seen? Was it just the fear mongering from the platform? Did your parents, were they, like, did they have go bags and they were always terrified of, something happening? Like, what was it for you that brought up where that fear of Armageddon, out of all these other things, was the one thing that was cemented in you?
oh, the go bags. I forgot about the go bags until you just said that. So ridiculous. Um, no, it was always they always had this little you know, we're gonna be Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think it was because they had that in the back of their mind that they just didn't want to die in Armageddon. Yeah, it was the fear mongering, and it was also um the whole family, both my stepdad's side and my mom's side, like, you're a Jehovah's Witness or you're gonna die. And you can't have worldly friends, like, from a young age. I remember going to school and just like thinking, all these kids are gonna die. I can't be friends with them. Like that, I don't know. It's just, it's ridiculous. It's so sad.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, was school in some way or in any way, uh, did you get to be a kid there? You weren't being able to be a child at home to some degree. Were you able to go to school and feel like you could maybe, I don't know, let your hair down and have a little fun?
Yes, I made it through elementary or whatever, but middle school is when you really start like attempting to come into your own. And I made my best friend. She's still one of my best friends to this day. We made friends in sixth grade, and I was allowed to go to school until eighth grade. We'll get into that though. But we made best friends, and we just always stayed in contact. And it ended up, when I ended up moving out, I moved in with her and her family. So I did have like solace there, but it's so hard. It makes you so different, and it's so embarrassing when you like get asked to go to a dance, or even you go to a dance with your friends and you're like, I can't go. I can't even go if I don't have a date. Like, it always made me feel like I have these really good friends, but they probably don't think I'm a really good friend because I never do anything with them and they don't understand.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. Even the people that you do get along with, it can really kind of only be at school during school hours, not so much after school a lot of times. Um,
Hmm.
so, what about then at the Kingdom Hall? So, you guys, obviously, I think, as you said, you weren't super active. Did you have
Hmm.
any friends at the Kingdom Hall? Did you feel like you fit in there in any way, or did you just loathe going to meetings and service when on the rare times that you did, or whatever the case was?
So we, as a family, we were pretty much in my younger years, like my middle school years, because elementary, I mean, that was just so up and down. I was in and out of different schools. Like, my mom was there, wasn't there. I don't really have a lot of memory of that, but more towards like fifth, sixth. whatever. Our family was kind of like ostracized, like you weren't really like good association because I mean by their terms they weren't, um, because they were kind of hanging out with a younger crowd, whereas like the older crowd who had kids already were like these people party all the time, like you're not going to their house, you know. Um, so I didn't really have very many friends. It got I do have one friend where her mom and my mom got close and she was allowed over and we ended up being troublemakers in our teenage years. But peak party parents let me have one friend from school over, the friend that I ended up moving in with. She was allowed to come over, but I wasn't allowed to come over there. So when they were like they had reached a point where they're like, how can we tell her no when they partied with like worldly people from their work would come over all the time.
So they could see how hypocritical they were being, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and so you then had that one friend that you were allowed to have over from school, or the one worldly friend, let's say.
Hmm.
Was what about did you ever do anything with any of the witness kids, or were your family like you were talking about them partying? Did they, I don't know, did you get together with other people at the Kingdom Hall and do things, or were they primarily doing things with worldly people from work and stuff?
Well, it was so you gotta remember, like my mom. I don't think I told you this, so you don't have to remember. But she was like, she had met my real dad when she was 15, so she was 16 when she had me, and 19 when she had my sister. So the couples that they were hanging out from the Kingdom Hall with and partying were like 19 to like maybe 23. So it was the younger generation from the Kingdom Hall that were also, in and out because that congregation was so lax. Um, that it was mostly them and some worldly people. So it was like people who were just kind of also messy, if that makes sense. So it was never so like the people that had kids my age in the hall were like in their 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
and my parents weren't hanging out with those people. So I never really got to I had one friend, and that was kind of later on in life that I got to see
Gotcha.
from the Kingdom Hall, and she's out as well, thank goodness. So we keep in contact.
Well, that's nice. But
Mm,
yeah, I guess the ostracism applied. It's kind of weird to be a child and already be ostracized. That's
mhm.
so strange to have your family be outcasts like that within the congregation that you're supposed to be a part of. Um,
Yeah.
so then, for you, how did things kind of progress as we've hit on middle school a little bit, but as you went on into your teenage years, how did things progress for you?
Oh, that was a mess. So what happened was, um, I got through middle school kind of okay. I would get in trouble. I would have boyfriends. I was always looking for validation, like, because I was, you know, kind of being a parent at home and then also like held to these standards that were like crazy ridiculous, like Jehovah's Witness standards when my parents were like a shit show. So I was also just always looking for validation. So I was like boy obsessed, I guess. So I would get in trouble for that. I stuck out a couple times, got in trouble for that. But it was when I was 14 that somebody sat down in my mom's chair, and we were super inactive back then. I think we may have been on the way completely out. Um, and they sat down and they started witnessing to her. And her relationship with my stepdad was in such a fragile place that she took it as a sign from Jehovah to go back. And when they went back hard. um,
Hmm.
they were all in. there was some things that they were doing before they went back that I know that they would have been disfellowshipped for. Um, but when they went back, they just, I mean, it was a 180. It was miserable. And I was 14 and I was finally, I was finally starting to hang out with worldly people and like feel a little bit normal. I mean, my parents fighting all the time sucked, but it was what it was. But when they went back, they went to the most uptight, by the book congregation in West Michigan. It was, and that congregation had a reputation for that. Like, if you want to be on the straight and narrow, you went to that congregation, and it was so messy. I mean, we weren't even zoned for it. She started studying to go back with her client. And we ended up having to go with her for like 6 months before my stepdad even started going back. And of course, she took that as she won him over, all that.
Oh, wow. So that even makes it more deep because now she gets, emotionally, she's getting this validation and this feeling of being
hmm
special that she was able to win him over.
Yeah, it's both of my parents are extremely like narcissistic, and it's a they're very kept up with their appearances.
Sure.
Um, and this was another way to switch to the congregation for them to avoid all of, any disciplinary action, or they had just been inactive for so long that I guess they were just worldly while they were living worldly. And then when they decided to go back, they just went all for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they happened when they, went back, they went to this super uptight congregation and really went hard at this because a lot of times, like online, a lot of times, some of the most vociferous defenders of the cult are people who were never fully indoctrinated, never fully in Jehovah's Witnesses, and they'll defend it to the bitter end. But that's because they always kind of felt guilty that they couldn't live up to it on some level.
hmm
And it sounds like
Yeah.
your parents maybe had some of that guilt, and then so in order to compensate, they overcompensate and go the other way to the other extreme. When a pendulum swings, it doesn't typically stop in the middle. The momentum keeps it going to the other side, and it sounds like they kind of went from wild child J-dubs to super strict, uptight witnesses, probably to overcompensate.
Yeah. And it, at that age, seeing what I've seen, I'd gone through a couple things, and at that age, for them to go that far to the extreme, I was not having it. Like, I, 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 I had such an attitude. Like, I, helped you raise your kid, watch you, bawl and brawl out, and now you want to, like, it was just the hypocritical side of the religion was instilled in me from the jump. Like, I saw through it all forever. Like, it and it was just, so I was like, no, I'm not gonna change my entire way of life now just so that, a couple years from now, which unfortunately it didn't happen, but a couple years from now we can go back to, doing everything but celebrating Christmas. So I had a very, very bad attitude about this.
Well, sure. And I mean, not only were you 14 and going through a lot yourself, I'm sure, but uh, look, it's just another point of confusion. You have all the
Mhm.
family stuff at the beginning of this that's confusing to a child. Now, then you're kind of a witness, but
Mhm.
your parents are pretty wild, and that's got to be confusing. And now your parents have decided to walk the straight and narrow, and that's got to be confusing.
Mhm. Yep. So they went very deep in, and it was decided that I was going to homeschool for freshman year. Which of course, as you know, homeschooling for Jehovah's Witnesses is just getting some books thrown at you and filling out some tests and sending them back in.
Hmm.
Um, so I lacked an education, and that was frustrating because I had aspirations and goals, and I just knew that it wasn't going to be feasible for me to try to do that the way that I was homeschooling. And at that point where they went the way that they went, I was to have no communication with worldly people. It was um, really hard. The When I was like 14 or 15, so you know how I said that I had kind of like got raised by my aunt when my mom went off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had three cousins, and they're like brothers to me. But their entire family had started their fading process, which is very interesting because my uncle was like a presiding overseer. So they had to fade their way out, and they did that successfully. They never got disfellowshipped or anything, but I was over there all the time. So they were like brothers to me. Well, they weren't, and I had kept up with them, obviously, and I would go visit them. They would go visit me. But they hadn't responded to any of my parents' badgering about being in the truth, and because they're on this, ministry kick and all that. And so I was to not communicate with them. Um, and I was particularly close to my middle cousin, and he, um, in the middle of, sorry, I'm going to get emotional. Um, in the middle of their fading process, he actually took his own life,
Mm.
because he was confused. Um, we don't really know why he was confused, but he was confused a lot about the religion. And they were a little bit older than me, so they were like older brothers to me, but he was the one that kind of like took me under his wing. Um, so my family told me one night, we left the meeting, and they told me, and I was devastated because I hadn't been allowed to talk to him in like, 6 months to a year. I still would. I would sneak and call because that's who I was as a person. But it was extremely traumatic. And we went to the funeral, and it wasn't a witness funeral. That kind of dug the grave for my aunt and uncle, because when the elders from their congregation found out, even though they were inactive, they felt the need to call and tell them, well, because he killed himself, you can't have a congregation funeral. That's what they said. No.
Yeah, that's not always the case, and it's not always true, because I've known of situations, but maybe it was back then. That was the rule. I don't know, but regardless, it's just heartless.
Yeah, it was disgusting. And I was 15, and I was asked to, it was his brothers that spoke at the funeral, and then they asked me because we were so close. Like, we were thick as thieves, me and these boys, and especially the one who passed away. And I was like, of course I will. So I talked after his other two brothers. I went in a different room and wrote down what I wanted to say. And I was especially close to that aunt too, because she took care of me, through my traumatic childhood. But when we left the funeral, I was given the cold shoulder by my entire immediate family because I didn't take the side of Jehovah. I chose to speak at the funeral, and so I wasn't on their side. I was on the side of the world.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was horrifying. And then I remember sitting with my aunt in front of the casket, and this stuck with me for the rest of my life. She was like, "You're getting older. Just keep doing your research. Read Crisis of Conscience. Levi would have wanted you to read that." She was like, "Just keep doing your research and never stop doing your research," because she knew that was one of the last times she would be able to talk to me. So that stuck with me, and I did. So that probably saved a lot of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm very, very sorry that this happened. That you're for your cousin and his whole family, for you, everybody involved. What a it's just another terrible reality of the cult.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, how many people are feel torn or hurt in different ways at least in part due to it. I don't know, everything that was going on then, but um, it's terrible that so many have lost their lives to it. Um, it's terrible to see that. I mean, I think that you really see the petty, stupid nature of Jehovah's Witnesses when a 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl talks at a funeral for a cousin who died in that manner, and is then people say, well, you took the side of the world. I mean, like how stupid is that?
Yeah, it
That
was
is
devastating.
it's so abusive. It's so, us versus them. It's
Hmm.
disgusting behavior. And it's it's just, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I mean, as a kid, uh what's these are the traumas that follow people through life, because um they're hard, and then nobody ever talks to you in any healthful way about this stuff. I love that your
Hmm.
aunt took that opportunity to say what she needed to say to you, and I'm so glad for that. But I don't know. Look, I'm just going to ask you, would you like to, do you have a favorite story or anything about your cousin you'd like to share? Is there
Oh my
anything? I mean, I know
gosh.
you weren't prepared for that, but and you don't have to if you
um,
don't want to, but shout him out. Is there something, a good time or something that you loved about him that you'd like to memorialize in some way?
yeah, for sure. I was my son's age. My son, maybe a little bit younger than him. I was like 8 or 9, and he was, for all intensive purposes, all three of those boys were my older brothers, because
Hmm.
there was so much of the time where my mom was absent, that I was over there. I just lived over there. But he would take me to 7-Eleven in his van, and we would shout at strangers. It was just like a place where I got to be a kid. And he would take me to the store, and we got lightsabers, and we would fight in the front yard. He told me that I absolutely was not allowed to listen to Good Charlotte anymore. Um, that was Sin, and we listened to Metallica, and we listened to Sublime, and we listened to Red Hot Chili Peppers. And like he, I'm very much grateful to him for my somewhat pretty good taste in music, because I'll tell you, I was never brought up Good Charlotte again.
Well, this podcast will not be sponsored by Good Charlotte.
Oh shit. Sorry.
uh, no, that's hilarious. I love that. I love that this cousin, or even your cousins in general, got to be like those older brothers, and you could just go have fun with them.
Yeah, that
What
was
a
my secret. That was my safe place for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, what a beautiful thing that you were able to have him, and then also his brothers in your life at that time where you really needed them. That's wonderful. So I hope he rests in peace, and I'm glad that you got to have that. You got to have that time with them, and you got to have those experiences, and you get to bring those memories forward with you in
Yeah,
life.
I named my son has his name as his middle name, so I kind of um came to terms with it right around the time my son was born, and kind of moved past it, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Grief is one of those things you learn to manage and take with you. It's not a process that you do and then it's just done.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that you're able to honor him in that way too. That's awesome. So where do you go from there? This is it's such a heavy moment. It's such uh, it's so traumatic and then dramatic, as these cult members are distancing themselves from you around this, which, what the heck, that's just so
Yeah,
crazy. um
crazy.
what do you do with all of this? Where do you go from there?
I like to term this next phase of my life as self-preservation.
Okay.
Um, I definitely I got this mentality of, okay, I'm going to get out. I just don't know how, and I know when because it's gonna have to be when I'm 18, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I definitely just went into self-preservation. My parents, oh, it was so, oh, it just like makes me sick to my stomach. But my mom, became a regular pioneer. My dad, my stepdad, I call him dad. He raised me.
Hmm.
He, started leaning more into the manpower of his business and reprioritized to be a regular pioneer. And I'm homeschooled. Okay. So guess what I'm doing all day long? Regular
No,
pioneering.
of course.
Um,
There, that's how you're going to get your schooling, right?
oh, it's such trash, and it makes me so sad for the people that these kids could be.
Hmm.
But that's another thing. Uh, no, I still had issues. I started talking to my ex-husband. I was 15 and he was 23
Hmm.
in the congregation, of course. Um, and kind of got caught up. My parents would go through my cell phone, they take my cell phone away. And I got to where I was very codependent on my ex-husband in a relationship with him. Um, because I felt like understood and listened to and all those things.
Hmm.
Um, and it was just a battle in and out. I got baptized when I was 15 because I was told that my life would change and I would have more freedom and, get a license and all that, which never happened.
Oh, so they
um,
kind of held out baptism. So are you saying that did your parents pressure you with to get baptized and say that if you get baptized you can have all these things?
yeah. Because my life would be different and my life would be for Jehovah, and um it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like I said, I was a rebel from birth, so um I found a loophole in the Michigan state law. I've always been, not to sound like arrogant, but I've always been a digger and a thinker. And um, I found a loophole in Michigan state law where if you want to move out when you're 17, all you have to do is make it known where you're at. Um, let your parents know where you are, and they can't make you come home. Um, and I had to write this really long letter and put it next to the um, newspaper for that day. And it was like a process of like 2 or 3 months. My friend that I told you about that I was friends with in middle school, I stayed in contact with her as best that I could. I mean, my parents would leave me home and like not leave a phone, like because they were so worried about me talking to like worldly people. So, hopefully the house doesn't catch on fire, right?
Yeah, or nobody breaks in after you or something. I mean, my goodness.
Exactly. I guess they were taking their chances with that, but heaven forbid me talk to a worldly person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I stayed in contact with her, and about 2 weeks before my 17th birthday, her parents had agreed to let me move in. They thought my parents were in a cult. They would stick up for me, and um, I siphoned my stuff out my bedroom window all week for a week, just like necessities. And then I was born on Christmas Eve, ironically. So that Christmas Eve, I left the letter on the dining room table and I walked out the front door and moved in with my friend Megan's family. I lived with them for like 6 months. It was difficult for me. We can go back. When I moved in with them, my parents and one of the elders, because they called the elders as soon as they figured out that I had moved
Mm-hmm.
out, one of the elders showed up at these people's house. So if they were trying to look not crazy and in a cult, they did not pull it off.
Yes. They doubled
Because they
down.
just right. And my friend's dad was like, she doesn't want to come home. She's going to stay here and celebrate Christmas with us. She'll be here. You know where she's at. She doesn't want to, like, because they were definitely supportive in that it was a cult and this is crazy. And I had coincidentally finished my homeschooling, so they threw me like a big witness graduation party. And everybody was like, "What do you want as a gift?" And I was just like, "Money." All the while, I'm in stealth mode, planning on moving out. So I'm like, "Yeah, I guess any money would help."
Nice.
Um, yeah, it was a mess. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, you were at
my
17. You were planning this thing in a very mature way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was probably like 20 in human years after all the
Yeah.
but they showed up with their elders and they were basically told to leave. Um it really was a loophole at the time, to not have to be 18, and then I figured it out. It's not the case anymore, unfortunately. But I I had stayed in contact with my ex-husband. He had been disfellowshipped for his drinking problem, and I think other women, I'm not sure, but I stayed in contact with him and then pursued a relationship with him, of course, when I was out. Um, and it was a series of bad decisions, but being so clueless to the world itself doesn't help.
Yeah.
Um, I stayed with them when I was 17 for about 6 months, and it was kind of difficult because I, offered to pay them rent and like have a job and just like, earn my place to live. And they still kind of wanted me to like have a curfew and stuff. And I was like, well, I didn't pursue this life of adulthood to come be somebody else's child. Like, no offense, but I'm done with that. So I ended up moving in with my ex-husband, and it spiraled from there.
Okay. So you live with that family for a while, and during that time, I guess you were finally allowed to talk to your ex-husband, right? Like that would have been, I guess, the
Hmm.
opportunity. I mean, I know you were doing things you weren't allowed to do technically anyway, but that probably gave you more freedom to talk to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I pursued the relationship from the second that I moved out. I think my life would have been a lot different if I hadn't, but that's okay.
Sure.
But I definitely, just started going on normal dates. And of course, that family didn't know how old he was, because now that I look back and I'm 28 years old and I have a 10-year-old son, I would have thought that that was absolutely ridiculous as well.
Hmm.
But such is the pedophilia that is Jehovah's Witnesses anyway. I mean, that's just their culture. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of
um,
lot of strange relationships.
yeah, yeah. But that family obviously didn't know that I was seeing someone that age. I think they wouldn't have been okay with that. They kind of looked at me like a second daughter, um, and that wouldn't have been okay. But yeah, I definitely pursued that when I left.
So then, well, I guess so you're now I guess 17 and a half. You've moved out you of this family's home as well to live with him, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And so how does that go for you?
Red flag after red flag after red
Mm,
flag. Not good. He's got a very severe drinking problem. He still has a very severe drinking problem. Uh, I loved him, and I feel like he loved me. Which was unfortunately one of the first times in my life that I had felt that kind of thing. Um, because my parents were kind of disingenuous with that kind of stuff. It was kind of, I love you, but only if you're doing what we want you to do. So it was very rocky. And I guess at that point, I was so in love that I didn't care. Um, Lots of drinking, lots of fighting, which was also pretty normalized in my childhood. So I thought that I needed to just work it out because that's what people did.
Well, sure. And also,
Um,
didn't you say that your parents were very narcissistic? And I know you mentioned being codependent yourself,
mhm,
and that pattern, right? The narcissistic and codependent pattern is one that tends to play out in these relationships. So you're it's just unfortunately for a lot of us, we were raised in a certain pattern, and then that pattern plays out, as we go through our lives, and so we can see what we're doing.
100%, 100%. I ended up getting pregnant, at 18. So yeah,
Hmm.
yep,
Yep.
I'm repeating patterns. But um, I decided in the time that I was with my ex-husband after I moved out, I was like, okay, what a good opportunity to finally get to meet my biological dad because I hadn't seen him ever, like
Hmm.
since I was like 4 or 5. Um, so that side of the family welcomed me, despite being disfellowshipped. Some of them were in the truth, but not really in the truth. The truth, the quote on. Ugh, I hate that I still say that.
I understand. So you're saying that they were technically witnesses, but weren't really what would be considered a strong witness as far as the witnesses go.
Right. And my grandparents were so excited to meet me and my biological dad, and his wife at the time and my little brother and sister. They were just like all, super excited and I felt so welcomed. Unfortunately, well, me and my ex-husband moved from where we lived to back to Saginaw, where that side of my family was. Um, so unfortunately, I was able to see kind of where my mom was coming from with my biological dad. He had a really severe drinking problem as well. Um, there's so much alcohol abuse. My mom has an alcohol problem. My stepdad has an alcohol problem. Like it's just so prevalent in Jehovah's Witness organization because that's something that they can get away with.
Yep, it's the one vice they can partake of.
It's so bad, but so I had a kind of a tumultuous relationship with my biological dad. We were a lot alike. Um Before I got pregnant with my son, I was overindulging on a regular basis, drugs, alcohol. And I would get in these lows where I would be like, this is because I left Jehovah. And it was just
Hmm.
so there were so many bad decisions that I made back then that I'm like, this wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have left. And it shows how manipulative it is because my life is great now and it's because of good decision making. it's not
Yes.
it's not because, you know,
Yes, I
for
saw.
Jehovah.
Yes, I remember the only time I ever felt like close to Jehovah was when after or as I was waking up and some things finally started going right for me in life when I wasn't following the witness path, and I attributed it all to God myself. And then I kind of realized one day, no, I've just learned a lot, and I'm actually making some healthy choices now, and
hmm
that's why it's going better. It's nobody. It was always the circumstances and the tools that I was exposed to, and now I have different tools and different circumstances as I'm working through something. And so I'm just glad that you were able to own that for yourself.
Yeah, that's so spot on. It was definitely the circumstance. I mean, I was 18, living with my biological dad and my boyfriend, and everybody had a drinking problem and everybody did drugs. And it's definitely circumstantial. It's
Yep.
not, and I didn't pull myself out of that, unfortunately, for a long time. But I definitely don't regret my biological dad actually passed away this time last year because he has or had a chronic alcohol problem. Um, but I'm glad that I did all of that in a way. I would do things different, obviously, but I am so fortunate to know that side of my family. And my grandmother is so caring, and they're just wonderful people. And they were so demonized my entire childhood that I did not expect it to be as much of a beneficial relationship as it is.
I'm glad you got to have it. Sometimes a lot of relationships in life are mixed bags, or a lot of experiences are mixed bags. And it sounds like you've grown quite a bit since those days. But it's hard to make healthy choices or good decisions when you've never had that modeled, right? And
Hmm.
for most of us, we were isolated. We were isolated from good decisions. That's
Yeah,
just
so true.
that's just
Yeah.
yeah. That's a heck of a thing to say, but it is true. Most of us were isolated from a lot of good decision making.
Hmm. Yeah, as much as I dug to find my way out of the organization and to find out the truth before there was, the Australian
Hmm.
Commission and before all of that, just crisis of conscience, just stuff that you had to dig for back then.
Hmm.
As much as I did that, I can only imagine what I would have done if I went on, and actually got educated. It's so annoying. the they're
Yeah,
so backwards.
yeah. A lot of people struggle with feelings of being stunted in certain ways, in certain aspects of
Mhm.
life after leaving. That's a common thing because, well, we were held back from a lot of opportunities.
Mhm.
So you had these relationships that you start bringing into your life, this whole other side of your family. You keep referring to this guy that you were with as your ex-husband. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming there must have been a wedding in there somewhere, and in a relationship, and then a beginning and an end to that. So what was that part of your life like?
That was right when I was 18. I was pregnant with my son. And I just, still had those, um, I guess they're values that most people have, but just the be married when you're gonna have a baby thing going on. So, despite every red flag in the book, from cheating to abuse to alcohol abuse, I decided that it would be smart to marry my ex husband.
Hmm.
Um, and so we had our son, um, and separated within probably 6 months of me having him. His alcohol problem was out of control. I couldn't trust him with our son. There was a lot of the time that we were separated. His sister lived with me, and we kind of co-parented all of our kids and ran the household together, and paid bills together because her her son's father wasn't in their life either, and she could recognize that he was out of control and decided to kind of co-parent with me. So we separated, and we were separated, and for a while. I can't remember how long, but it was a decent amount of time. And I was dating, planning on getting divorced and dating as any 19-20-year-old girl does, and taking care of our son. He would rarely come to see him. He kind of lived in like a frat house with a bunch of other guys, like, just having the time of his life, I guess. Um, and so obviously I wasn't going to let my son go there. The only time my parents reached out to me when I had my son was to ask me if I needed them to take him.
Oh, you mean take him,
Yes.
not
And
like
I was
babysit.
right.
Hmm.
Um, and I just told them where to put it. Um, why would I ever subject him to the childhood that I had? Like, that just doesn't. I mean, sometimes when I talk to them, which is very, very years far and in between, but when I talk to them, I wonder if they were there for the same things that I was there for, because it's so much denial. But
Hmm.
so that went on I had a boyfriend. I think it wasn't that serious. And then my ex-husband, who was, I guess, still my husband at the time, but we had been separated for a long time. I want to say it was close to 2 years. I know it was more than a year. I guess I just never prioritized getting divorced. I don't know. But he came to me with, let's move to Tennessee. I have a friend who has a really good job for me. He'll help us move and we can start over and we can go to the meetings down there and get reinstated and start over. And I was in kind of a dark place. I was dating people who weren't very good people, and I was struggling to make ends meet for my son, which I did. I always pulled it off, but it was extremely difficult with no education and no education of the world in general. So it took a lot of like contemplating, but I still had the love that I had for him, at the beginning of the relationship. So I decided that I would go with him to Tennessee and we would start over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the patterns, I guess, just kind of they repeat, right? And it's hard to break away
Yeah.
from those things, in
Yep.
those relationships as well, and how we act or interact within those relationships. So, um, mm. The part where you said that your parents offered to take your son, again referencing the apostasy movie earlier, and just everything. It's just this. It's something that I think happens more often than people know about. I know there's been at least one or two other people on the podcast who have had active witnesses push to take their child from them, and that is
Mhm.
just it's a really warped thing that can result in a lot of future pain. So um I'm just glad that didn't happen for you um in
I
the
think
end. But
they knew better than to cross me like that. I've always been very headstrong,
yeah.
and if they'd have tried to get him taken from me or something of that nature, it would have been a battle. And my grandparents as well, on my dad's side, they wouldn't have let that happen. Like, I know a lot of people don't, when they're first out, they don't have the legal resources that they need for that kind of thing. But I know that my family would have made it happen if I needed it. So I was very fortunate in that way.
Yeah, you had support. You weren't all alone. So I'm glad that you
Yeah.
that you had that. Um so you get a fresh start then with your husband in Tennessee. So how does that go after the move?
Horribly. Um, Horrible. The alcohol abuse and the physical abuse just got worse. Um, Further away, less repercussions. His friend that moved down here was married, and she is actually also one of my best friends to this day. We both ended up leaving our husbands. So,
Mhm.
but he was very, there was a couple years where me and my ex-husband would get into it, and my ex-husband would actually go to jail. Like, he would go to jail for these things, and this friend of his just kind of facilitated the alcohol abuse, facilitated helping him get, out of jail. And it wasn't until this friend of his became a mutual friend and would come over and hang out with both of us, and he would see my ex-husband like physically black out and just be awful, that he realized, okay, this is not okay. Because I think unfortunately there's a stigma with women where they're just not believed,
Sure.
and I was so young as well, and I think that he just thought I was being dramatic. And then we had a little incident, and from then on out this was no longer tolerated, that type of behavior anyway.
Mhm.
So we came to a congregation here, and went to meetings for about 6 months, um, wrote our letters. We're married. We're not really, aside from the blatant alcohol abuse, doing anything to where we couldn't scripturally be reinstated.
Hmm.
I wrote a letter. I mentioned that I felt bad for the way that I treated my parents when I left. I was very cold. I had until probably 2 years ago a fire under my ass, and I was a very loudmouth, rude apostate. One of those ones that I cringe watching now.
Okay.
I was one of them. So I apologized for that in my letter, and the elders took that as I wasn't trying to get back for Jehovah. I was trying to get back for my family. So, um,
Wait a minute.
we
Wait a
were,
minute. Wait a minute. So
uh-huh.
you're saying they didn't let you in? They didn't let you back in for that?
Hmm.
Um, don't they weaponize your family in order to get you back? They know.
Yeah.
Do you know how few people go back because they quote love Jehovah? Most people are going back for their family. So it's just it's like, so let me you weaponize my family against me, and then you're upset that I might come back for my family. It's
Yeah.
oh, it's so uh the mind fuck that they do is
Yes. a
just,
hundred
oh
percent.
my gosh, it's so terrible. Not only
Yeah.
that, but also the shame and everything else. We can list off many ways that it is just there to destroy people mentally and emotionally as much as they can. But so they wouldn't let you back because they thought you were just coming back for your family then.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm gonna add this because I think this is important. I did not believe in the
Sure,
religion.
sure.
Still at this point when I was trying to get back, I did not believe in it. I knew that it was, you know, just bullshit, honestly, like all of it. But I thought in true form to my mother that this would get my husband's drinking under control. It would be about our happy family life, and it was worth it if I could keep my family together and, you know, just bullshit my way through this. Um, and unfortunately, saying that now, it's like you said, it's pattern after pattern, and it's like it's not embarrassing, but it's like, Jesus, like how did I not see that back then?
Well, I gotta say something to that because we just had the Crusaders documentary that came out.
So
Um,
good. Me and my
yeah,
husband watched it last night. It was so good.
yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of people, in my coaching practice, even been talking about it this week a little bit, and people, just kind of that feeling of watching something like Crusaders and then saying, well, how could I not have seen what was going on? And it's like, well,
Hmm.
because you were so deep into it, you were inside it. You can't, the only way you can start to see something is once you can get away from it and get perspective. And for most of us, we were raised into this thing, or whether it was the cults or whether it's the patterns with which we live our lives, those patterns and those roles are kind of set early on in life. And then we all just view those as normal, right?
Hmm.
That's just how life is. And so you just continue and you repeat these things. And it's not until you can maybe get beyond just basic survival and get to a place where you can actually get a little distance from it, where you can start to see that, oh yeah, this isn't working for me, but so many people
Hmm.
are hard on themselves for not seeing this stuff. And so just for anyone listening, it's not, please don't blame yourself for not seeing this stuff, because was it so far in the forest you can't see the trees, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're so deep in, you have no basis with which to stand on the outside really and see it, because the patterns just keep repeating.
Hmm.
And it's really hard until you can get away from it by whatever means that occurs, and then you can start to see it with a little bit of clarity, and then you're on the path of trying to heal so that you don't repeat those patterns. But um, yeah, I think all of us were put in a lot of positions that we repeated, And just so you know, even quote worldly people who were never raised in a cult still are raised in dysfunctions and still end up repeating those patterns. So it's just a very
Mhm.
human thing to do. It's actually, that is actually quite normal to repeat those patterns. So don't
Yeah.
be hard on yourself. Don't hate yourself if you're out there.
I love that. I'm glad you said that. Um, I don't know where we
Oh,
were.
that's okay. So you're back down there. Your mom has told you that even though uh, your family growing up was not a good experience, if you and your husband come back to quote unquote the truth, then suddenly that is going to make everything okay, and he will quit drinking, and everything will be starting to heal and go on the up and up.
Right. Yeah. So that letter that got denied, I'm a I'm I hate when I sound big headed, but I'm a pretty quick person. So the way the elders presented their judgment of me to me the first time gave me all the clues on what to write the second time. So I wrote this heartfelt live for Jehovah bullshit letter, and we got reinstated as a couple, as a married couple. And nothing changed. I think everyone listening probably saw that coming.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing changed. Um, our marriage was awful. Lots of drinking. I ended up drinking just to cope. Um, it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I was reinstated, I think, mm, 2 years. I reunited ish with my dad and stepmom. They came down. My dad does housework, so they worked on our house a little bit, and they housework, construction, whatever. They helped us fix up our house a little bit. My mom came down separate one time. They got really involved with my son, which I from my son being about 1 to where I could tell how he would vibe with people, I have let them see him. And it's been an insane thing for me because I want nothing to do with them when I'm, not having to see them because I'm reinstated. I really don't want anything to do with them. But coming from where I came from and being kept from my family, my biggest fear was always that when he got older, he would be, like my mom kept me from this side of my family, and I just don't want that from him. So I've always let him spend time with them. But when my mom came down to see me, like we went to Nashville and we got tore up, and it was kind of like trying to get to know somebody as an adult, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just very strange. Everything felt like a calculation. Like I needed to act a certain way to be around my family, and then it progresses to everybody in the congregation wants to be friends with us because we're back. Um, and I had a really hard time hiding who I was because that's what you have to do if you have any type of personality whatsoever.
Yeah, it's back to the calculation you just mentioned, right? Like, what parts of my
Yeah.
personality can I allow to be seen?
Yeah, and so my marriage was so bad, and my husband would go out, my ex-husband would go out to work, be gone for weeks at a time. Definitely some drinking, definitely some confirmed infidelity later on that I got, I there's a guy that he worked with closely who is also out now who told me you definitely had like grounds to leave him. He just never gave them to you. So that was hard. I mean, he wouldn't answer his phone. Like he would get obliterated and get up and go to work the next day. I don't know how, but he did. Um, and so that was very difficult, and that progressed into something further for me. We made friends with a couple that was older than us. My husband was like 30 at the time, and I was like 23, 24. and we made friends with a couple that was in their mid 40s, and that was a slippery slope. Um, I don't know how to say this. It was very quickly picked up on because this congregation that we went to down here, they like to sauce it up. They're a very alcohol driven congregation.
Mm-hmm.
um, we would get together, for like watch shower studies, and everybody would be drinking afterwards. Like it was no thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was very quickly apparent to the man in this couple that we were friends with how badly I was treated, and how severe the alcohol problem was with my ex-husband. And that progressed into us talking, um, inappropriately. I say inappropriate not because of anyone's standards, but other than being married.
Sure. No, I understand.
Um, but we ended up starting a relationship. It was very emotional based at first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's a ministerial servant and like probably 20 years older than me. But we had an affair essentially, um, for about 9 months, and for a very long time it was everything but the physicality of it, because this person was not willing to give up their relationship with their daughter. And he knew that, if you leave and you get disfellowshipped, you lose your family. And everything he had down here was his family.
But he was worried about his relationship with his daughter, not necessarily his wife.
No, unfortunately, we were both miserable.
Mm-hmm. There's a
Um,
lot of that in the witnesses.
and he's still with his wife, so I feel so guilty saying that, but it's true. I mean, their daughter would come to me because we were close as well, which is so fucked up. And I still lose sleep over the fucked up situation. But I've kind of made peace with it. But his daughter would be like, he can't stand my mom. I don't know why they're together. She tricked him into getting married. And I'm hearing all this while having a relationship with her dad. And I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, this is so messed up. But I was very much fell in love with him. I've always been quick to love somebody who will show me love, and that's been my downfall a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I was very much in love with him, and I was at a breaking point with that situation because it went on for a very long time. And I was planning on all this time. I had been just like a housewife. I just took care of my son, and my husband would either be there and provide money or he would send money. Like that's just what it was. Um, and I was getting fed up. I was gonna leave him, and then this whole affair started. So I stayed because I didn't know what was gonna happen with that. Um, and I just got kind of caught up in that. I just disregarded the rest of my life. um, and I reached a breaking point one day, with it all, and I told him how miserable I was, this guy that I was talking to, and whatever. I told him how miserable I was and that I couldn't do it anymore. And then he said to me, "Do you want to see something funny?" Like he was trying to change the dynamic of the conversation because it was too much. It was going to be like, "When are you going to leave your wife?" type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was too much for him. And so he said, "Do you want to see something funny?" And I said, "Do you want to see something funny?" And then I sent him this quote about integrity because, um, we had all but like hooked up like an hour before a family worship that we all had to go to. And his part was on integrity. And I just remember sitting there so fucking baffled, like reading from, the reasoning book or whatever the hell they read from, and talking to these people about integrity. And I was like, I love this man, but he has none. Like, what is going on? And it was just, so I sent him a quote on integrity, and I just blocked him out of my life. I've never talked to him since. And then I told my husband, I was like, I had an affair with this guy. This is what's happening. Um, and and it was a shit show.
Oh, it's sad because sometimes what we take for love is attention,
Mhm.
and codependency, as it has been mentioned already. And so many
Mhm.
of us grew up in these, your families had the alcohol present, but even if the alcohol isn't present, there's actually a really good book out there called The Narcissistic Family, about these families that were presenting clinically that didn't have alcohol involved. And that was my family, because my dad is the
Mhm.
byproduct of, he had alcoholic parents. And um, it's just a shame, because ultimately nobody is getting their needs met.
Yeah.
Even the love that we receive doesn't feel uh, quite as good as it could if it was real love, because a lot of times
100%.
it's codependency. And I just, again, we tend to repeat these patterns, right? And until we can
Mhm.
see them. And so I'm just glad that, um I'm sorry that to see that, you know these patterns have repeated in your life. But I think that this is I'm just glad that you're talking about this openly, because I really think that there are probably a lot of people out there that can probably see some of themselves in this, because we were all raised in a narcissistic cult. It's a bunch of narcissists leading a bunch of codependents. And
Mhm. Oh my gosh, yes.
that's what the
Yep.
cult is. And then it trickles down even into the families. And a lot of us had a lot of narcissism around us, so therefore we got used to managing everybody else's feelings and trying to keep everybody else happy and losing ourselves. And so
Mhm.
yeah, I'm just sorry that, because in all of this, nobody's winning here. It's just hurt, it's just pain. and um
Mhm.
so wow. Well, I'm sorry that, so this relationship then ended up obviously not working out, which led you then to tell your husband in that relationship, which wasn't working out. So, I mean, you said it was a shit show. Did it
Oh my
blow
gosh.
up?
It was
Or, I mean,
so
I can only imagine.
yeah. Yeah. With this guy, I had gone to his dad's house a couple of times, which is really strange. His dad was not in the truth, and I would get into it with my ex-husband, and he would be like, "Just go to my dad's. He'll take care of you. Like, just go stay there." So it was so intertwined. There was so many relationships at hand. Like I had a relationship with him, I had a relationship with his dad, and then my husband was never even there. Um, and so I tell my ex-husband with the pretense that okay, I'm going to tell him I'm going to get disfellowshipped and it's just going to be over. Like it'll just all be over. This, I can pick up and move on from that, right? No. He was a ministerial servant and he was very highly looked upon. Um, Best friends with most of the elders. Basically, everybody was like, "Why are you not an elder?" So it was not acknowledged. We had a elders meeting where they basically told me, "Don't tell anyone, because you don't want to stumble the congregation." Um, we will privately reprove, or no, we'll publicly reprove both of you, but we'll do it so far between that people won't know. Um, and we're going to give you this elder and his wife for counseling because your husband wants to work it out. So that didn't go the way that I planned.
Wow.
um,
Well, I mean, let's face it, even if it had, it's like moving to 3 hours away, right? Like you can't outrun your problems. And so it would have ended up resulting in some sort of an issue regardless. Now you just have a different set of issues.
yeah, for sure. Um, that backfired.
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have gone about outing the entire thing just because there's so much hurt involved.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that I would have gone about it the way that I did had I known that it wouldn't change. I just expected to be disfellowshipped, and I just was going to at that point I had gotten a job, and I was building my way out of leaving my husband anyway, whether he was
Hmm.
going to leave his wife or not. I was going to leave. That's another thing they said to me in the elders meeting. They said, they didn't ask. They said, because they knew we were unhappily married, they said, were you just looking at this person as a way out of your unhappy marriage? And and then they said, and he probably just liked having attention from a younger girl. Um,
Okay.
so so I was a piece of meat and he was my meal ticket, I guess. Um,
Pretty much. That's what they're
and I was
saying.
just so baffled. I was like, because the emotional aspect had been, over like a long period of time. So when you grow that close to somebody and then these people are just like, no, it's all surface. It's like
Hmm.
it's to fit their narrative because he was best friends with the elders. They're best friends. The elder on my committee for that was his very best friend. They work in the same place. They do everything together. So I don't know how he's not partial to that situation anyway, but whatever. Um, so I was just gonna pick up and leave, but unfortunately, with the pressure of my family that would speak to me at that time, it was to work it out still because my ex-husband wanted to work it out despite anything else.
Yeah. So you end up going to, so they assigned you an elder and his wife. And
hmm
how were these people qualified to counsel you in any way?
Oh God, who knows? They've been married and in the religion for like 30 some years, so they're automatically qualified therapists, right?
Yeah, they you don't even know, like even the elders assigning you to them don't know what goes on in that house. You know what I'm saying? They don't really know. Like just because you were married for a long time doesn't mean you were happily married. A lot of people in the
Right.
in the cult are stuck in very very unhappy marriages. So,
hmm
um, yeah, it's kind of interesting that they would just assign you to a random elder and his wife. To
hmm
So they're going. So, and did the elders know that your husband had these alcohol issues and everything? Right?
Yes, it was constantly disregarded, which will, come up eventually. But when I left him, about a year and a half after we were divorced, he got a DUI with my son in his car.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely over the limit, like hit a stop sign. My son's in the back seat of the car. They called me at work to go get him. And at that point, I filed like a restraining order and stuff because I couldn't keep him safe. And I knew how bad his drinking problem was because I would go pick up my son and he would be passed out and he's 2, 3 years old, can't take care of himself.
Right.
Um, but no, the whole time I had made it very clear that there was a big problem and they would just try to counsel their way out of acknowledging that. And it was because it was so alcohol driven in that congregation and it was such a big problem that if they acknowledged it in one person, they'd have to acknowledge it throughout.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
and so they didn't want to touch that.
Yeah, they may, the elders you're talking to may have had their own issues with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so how does
Um,
counseling go, or where does your marriage go after you tried to get this fellowship and were unsuccessful?
um, I lasted 2 months, I think. I know that was a total of 2 studies with this couple, and I made a couple of the meetings coincidentally. Like, I don't know, it was all through being encouraged by people that for some reason I wanted to keep in my life. And I made it through like 2 months, and then I just was like, this is never going to change if I don't make a change. So I ended up leaving my ex-husband, and they kept trying to get me into an elders meeting because I moved out and I moved in with a girl that I had made a connection with. Like I said, I had a job, so I got a roommate and then moved out. And because that whole time I was building my way out of that relationship anyway, so it wasn't really much for me to move out.
Hmm.
Um, And then they kept trying to get me to meet with them over and over again, and I was like, "I'm not meeting with you. I don't owe you anything." So they asked me to formally write that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And I did that. I did it in a text message, and that elder texted me back and was like, "I'll take this as a formal, like, whatever." It was technically a disassociation, um, but in my heart of hearts, I decided to tell them that they had grounds for my ex-husband to get remarried so that he would have that opportunity, because that's who I am as a person, you know.
Hmm.
Because once he had accepted me back, it was he didn't have grounds anymore, right?
Oh yes, yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
so I decided to be a good person, and because I had so much guilt for what had happened in the meantime, that I was like, well, let me not take that from him. So I think like on their record, maybe I'm disfellowshipped, but I disassociated myself.
Gotcha, gotcha. I mean, does it matter? In the end, it was just how you just want to get out, right?
It does matter to me just because I wanted this time for them to not take it from me. I want to be very clear that I decided, if that makes sense.
No,
Because,
I get
like,
that. I disassociated, so I totally get that.
yeah, yeah. And especially, like, with that side of my mom side of my family who are so strong in it, I still think that they think that I chose to get disfellowshipped, and it's not the case. Like, I don't care what happened. I could have stayed. I did not want to stay.
Right, right. Um, so then once that was done, where did you go? Did you just move in with your friend, or where did your life
hmm
go?
It got better and worse. um, I still kind of had shell shock. I wasn't I was newer at my job, and I worked at a restaurant, and I don't know if you know anything about a restaurant climate, but it's very party driven, and, like, I don't know, it's not necessarily the best environment.
Mm.
Um
The only restaurant I
especially
worked in was Wendy's when I was 16.
oh
So that's not the kind of
no.
restaurant I think you're talking about.
No, it was a bar. I worked for a
Gotcha.
bar and a restaurant, so
Yeah, so that
it
would
was
be the
it was
parties.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I had a hard time prioritizing. I was still heartbroken. Um, that was another thing. I didn't understand how they could ask me to stay with my ex-husband, and I was torn up over somebody else. Like, that just blew my mind, and I was not, like, secretive about it by any means.
Hmm.
I was very open, and I was like, "No, I'm still in love with this other person. I have no feelings for you." And they were just like, "Well, you'll get them back, you know." And I was just like, "Oh my god, whatever." So I was still kind of coming out of that, and I ended up dating a guy who was, like, on drugs, and I didn't know, because you don't know anything about the world. Like, you just don't know. You were never, like, exposed to that kind of thing, and so once I figured that out, I was like, "Oh shit, like, I'm making the worst decisions, like, it must be because I left," there's that thing. But I always had, like, kind of in the back of my mind, it's not because you left, it's because of other people's choices. So I ended up just working my way. I worked my way into the family that I worked for at their restaurant. They took me in, like, I went to their holidays and stuff, and I just made a network outside of the people that I knew, and just kind of rebuilt from there.
So then, um, so you kind of were trying to rebuild your life there, and how long ago was that occurring? How many years ago was that?
It was like 2015, 2016.
Okay, okay. I was just trying to understand the timelines.
Yeah.
So then there has been time since then. So where does your life? So you start to rebuild your life to some degree, or,
hmm
or or try to at least, I guess, find your place in the world. Um, where? What do you do after that?
Um, just like a couple years of just kind of dating and trying to figure out what I want in life, and fighting that codependent tendency. I had a couple relationships that didn't work out, and just kind of made my own life. I had a roommate for a long time. We were, we're still really good friends. We lived together. She had a son, so they grew up together. We lived together for like 3 years, and just kind of I worked at the restaurant and the bar for a long time, and then I went into an office job and kind of met new friends there, and just kind of got to know people as I got to know them. When you're in a little town and you work at a bar, you just meet people, you just
Oh, I bet.
network.
Yeah.
So it was, there were a couple, times where I got in like a dark place, or I would drink and I would call my parents and I would be like so upset. And that is like, if anyone's listening, that's the worst thing you can do. Like, the worst thing you can do is show these people your vulnerable moments, because you don't call them when you're doing fine. You call them when you're upset and you're looking for like some guidance and something that you would get from your parents. And what they take from it is, look how terrible it is in the world. Like,
Yeah.
and it just feeds their egos, and it's just, I've definitely grown out of doing that, but there were a couple of those, and the next morning I was like, oh.
Yeah, and in the end, also, part of that is look who you're wanting love and attention from. It's
Mhm.
people who have never been able to give it. They don't have it. They're not. For most of us, most of our families, uh, were never very healthy, and you're just like trying to get water out of a dry well, or out of an emotional
Mhm.
desert. There's just not, they don't typically have anything healthy to offer anyway, other than what come back to the cult.
Mhm.
They,
Yep.
again, and then we get to the narcissistic and codependency part. you know um they don't see us for who we are. They see us for who they wish we could be, or for as a reflection of them, and want to control
Mhm.
us and make us to be just like them. So it's just, yeah, it's those are low moments for a lot of people when they reach out in that way, and it typically doesn't end up going super well.
Yeah,
I'm sorry it
definitely.
didn't
And
for
I
you either.
it's okay. I'm in a very happy spot now, so it just is what it is. But I definitely, during that time, um my ex-husband was arrested multiple times for drinking,
Mm.
um, child endangerment one time, but it helped me with him. He never got reproved. He never, well, I think he did get reproved, but he never got disfellowshipped. Like, to me, anyone with normal sense would disfellowship somebody who had their 3-year-old in the back seat because their drinking problem is so severe. That just makes sense to me. But the lack of discipline and the constant support that he got from my witness family was just disgusting to me. So it just helped me realize that this is not something that I want to be a part of.
So now that, so you're out. So let me ask you this. So did you have to do anything? Because I know you said that you never really, it doesn't seem like you really ever super believed. Was there a lot of mental waking up or emotional waking up that you had to do from the cult? And were there any resources that helped you, as far as like, um, because for you, a lot of this was behavior type things, right? That you were getting in
Mhm.
trouble for or whatever, and you didn't weren't really super attached to the beliefs. So, um, what helped you to detach from that?
The Australian Royal Commission.
Yeah.
um, I was out by then. So I had already been in these like apostate groups and just bulletin boards here and there. But up until that point, there was always that nagging in the back of my mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe my life is in turmoil in certain instances because I left. Like, maybe they're right. And then when all that child abuse started getting uncovered, and throughout the years, they're just like blatantly denying and not making any, they change so much of the religion and they don't change that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's just, it's it makes me sick, and it reaffirmed for me that if there's one religion in the entire world that's right, it's obviously not this one.
Yeah.
um Not that I believe that. I don't believe in any one true thing. But that just solidified it for me. And I, like I said, I drank a lot back then and I partied a lot, and so I would get the fire and I would call my stepdad and argue with him, and he would entertain it because he's an alcoholic and he would be drinking and he would entertain it, and I would have questions that couldn't be answered, and it just, there was a lot of back and forth. I was always closer to him. I always felt closer to him because he took care of me better than anyone else, despite the 5-hour lectures and all that shit. Bible beatings.
Yes.
I always would reach out to him because he always had a level head to me. There was a spot in my teenage years where he came to me and he was like, I don't understand. Nobody's reached out to us. I don't understand why we're even witnesses. Like, he told that to me. So I know there's something in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just unfortunately think that they, as people, in order to have a moral compass, they have to follow that religion.
Maybe.
um, so, I mean, nothing else has worked for them.
Yeah, yeah. So for yourself, uh, so you wake up, as far as being able to call the cult out for what it is there any ways that you feel today? How does your past life still impact you? You know, where do you still have ties with anyone? I mean, I know you have a child, right? So, how does that factor into your life today?
Co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was difficult when I couldn't leave my son with his dad. That was difficult for me. His mom is a Jehovah's Witness and a wonderful, wonderful person. Not a bad word I could ever speak about her. Um, she moved down and moved in with him, so that is a safe place for my son. It wasn't. So that was very difficult, in and out of court, trying to navigate not only, teaching my son that what he's being taught over there is not accurate, but also his safety. Um, that was the tie. And then also, like I said, I never kept my son from my parents. I still haven't. Um, they actually relocated from Michigan to Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, really? Just across the
Yeah.
river.
Can you go unwitnessed for me?
Give me an
No,
address. I'll go talk to him.
I'm just kidding. It won't work. I've tried. No,
That doesn't work.
but they relocated because they learned Swahili and they're trying to recruit people who don't know any better.
Mm.
Um, but that's neither here nor there. But so they still see him, and there was especially in 2017 and 2018, they were still in Michigan, and there was a time where I was so, like, mortified learning what I was learning that I wouldn't let my son go up there, because if you couldn't protect me as a child, why would I send my child up there? And it's a religion that protects pedophiles. So and even if they're not protecting them, it's, if a pedophile on the street learned about their way of dealing with things, that's their paradise. Like, they're never going to get any repercussions for their actions. So I was afraid to send my son up with them. So that's been a point of contention for a very long time. At that point, I didn't think that my son was old enough to speak up for himself. So there was a pause there to where I wouldn't let them see him. And of course, it was because I was an evil apostate and all that. Um, but he does go see them now that they live closer, and now that he never puts his cell phone down. So he could call me at any time. And it's not that I think that my parents would do anything or anything like that. It's the company that they keep. Um, it's a very, very big point of contention for me and my family.
Well, sure. And I mean, let's say Jehovah's Witnesses, the danger in Jehovah's Witnesses is not simply sexual abuse, it's or physical abuse or whatever, but it's the mental and emotional abuse and
And the
the
indoctrination. Yeah.
indoctrination, the
Yeah.
cult indoctrination, and the the viewpoints that they give people, and that's where a lot of the danger lies. In addition to, obviously, they do at times attract, or whatever the case may be, people who aren't healthy, and obviously your parents aren't super healthy anyway.
Hmm.
So it's how much do you want your child to associate with people who um, clearly aren't mentally and emotionally well. So
Yeah.
it's all a balancing act, and everybody has to make their choices with that. Um, so then you also have, so you're co-parenting also, with your ex-husband, and
Who is
so
an active Jehovah's Witness.
oh, he's
Yeah.
inactive at this point. Gotcha.
No, 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 no. He is. He's very active.
Oh, very active. Oh, he's
Yeah.
inactive. Okay, not inactive.
Yeah.
Active
Which is
Jehovah's Witness.
miserable.
Yeah. That's tough too. So your kid's getting a lot of exposure to a cult, and
Hmm.
you, I assume, have to try to take the role of helping him to see other things in life, and that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. It was much more difficult when he was younger. I used to like lay awake and cry about it, just because he would reference things like paradise, and he would ask me why I didn't want to be in paradise with him. Um, because it's being manipulated. Like I'm choosing to not have that forever life with him. Um, he's just now he's 10 and he's just now kind of coming into his own with that. He doesn't really talk about it a lot, but he knows that that's what they believe and he knows what we believe in our house, and he definitely can see the difference. And I worry about it less now than I did when he was young and he would come home and tell me these things that he was taught, and I was just it, I don't ever want him to not only believe that, but just the confusion that comes with having two different households. I just hate that for him.
Sure, absolutely. Um, well, so today, so I guess, are you still shunned by your parents though they take your child? Do they still shun you completely?
100%. We
Okay.
don't have any communication unless he's with them. And it's so strange to me, I guess, because they know that the line of communication has to be open. I have to know who he's with, when he's up there, what they're doing, up there, over there, wherever Kentucky is. But they have to have that open line of communication. So it's if he goes for 2 weeks, it's open communication with us. And then of course we don't touch any sensitive subjects. But then, once he's back, I don't hear from them for another year. So it's very strange. Sometimes when my dad drops him off, he'll like give me a hug and stuff. And it's very foreign to me now that I've seen how actual families work. And I'm just not here for it.
Yeah. Does it, just curiosity, does your son, um, does he make comments, or can you see, does it affect him in any way that you are this, I mean, he's basically watching your parents shun you and take him. Does that impact him in any way? Does he say anything about that, or does he find it strange, or does he just kind of put it in the context of the beliefs?
He definitely puts it in the context of the beliefs. There was a moment I had a Facebook memory post that was like talking about how it's so strange that my son got back from my parents' house a couple weeks ago, and then he asked me why I don't have parents because he was so little. Um, he just he didn't put two and two together who they were. Um, they were his grandparents, but he didn't understand that they were my parents because obviously, you know, there's no family interaction. Now I think he kind of thinks it's BS. He's very, we grew up together, me and my son. You know, we went through hard times together. We grew up together. I was extremely young. So he's very perceptive. He just doesn't like to talk about it. He doesn't like the division and the confrontation aspects of it, but he definitely, I think he can definitely see through it.
Yeah, it's a tough position for you to be in and for your child to be in,
Mm-hmm.
your son. If you could say anything that you wanted to your family or friends who shun you, what would you say?
Um, I guess just that you should definitely always question, always look for answers to your question, and that despite what you're taught, you can have a good life and be a good person and have a good moral compass without people hammering down on you and telling you it's the way of life. Just always question. And I think the first realization, first thing that should be obvious but isn't, is that if you're told that you can't question it or there's no answer, that it's probably a red flag. You should probably question it further.
Yeah.
Um, just just research, just do stuff. Look out for yourself. These people aren't looking out for you. You need to look out for yourself.
I like that you said that because I think there's a book called Codependent No More that is about codependency, and in it, I think at the beginning it says that the answer to codependency is simple, but of course it's not. You know that, but it sounds simple anyway, and that is take care of yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and that's what you're basically saying. You're saying take care of yourself. Check into the things that you've been taught, and don't just believe them because they're there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, actually do some research, and that is a wonderful way to take care of oneself. That's self-care. That's an awesome thing. So what do you enjoy now about the life that you have since leaving? And is there anything that, do you have any dreams or anything that you would like to reach out for?
Um, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with what we like just said also, is that it feels like it's the end of your life to lose everybody, but once you like pull out of it, it's the beginning of your life. Like it's literally the beginning of your life. But no, it's great. I have so many good friends that are good friends, not because I'm living by a book, but because they're good friends, they're good people. Um, there's just so much life to live. I'm married. We have 3 kids between the two of us. Um, married for like the right reasons.
Yeah.
um, and we just like to experience things. There's so many places that I want to see. Once you start living, you know, to experience things instead of experience things after you either die or make it through Armageddon.
Yes.
there's
Yes.
there's so many wonderful things to see and people to meet, especially when you can just open your heart without having that guard up. It's so worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Any places that you've been able to go that, or any experiences you've been able to have? Are there any that you've really been able to appreciate?
Um, everything. We go like we go like to, you know, waterfalls, and you know there's a ton of that stuff down here.
Oh, Tennessee's beautiful.
Um, yeah, so just we're kind of nature freaks, but just and then also being able to like celebrate holidays like with my chosen family and with my husband's family, and there's just so much life to live, and you have so much free time.
I'm sure it's really cool to be able to celebrate holidays with your children as well.
Yeah, yeah, my son, fortunately, he doesn't have any aversion to getting presents or anything like that, so we
That's
do
great.
those.
Yeah, I'm glad that you get to experience that. I don't know. I've always thought that seeing it through the eyes of a child is a really cool thing to be able to do for
Yeah,
people who never got to experience that themselves as a child. So,
definitely. I have to like make myself get in the Christmas spirit because it's not my fave, but it's always so worth it. And you know, you don't have any emotional connection to
Sure.
it, so you have to kind of force yourself, but it's all worth it.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad that you found these things that you enjoy. I'm glad that you've found someone to spend your life with, and your husband that you, like you said, for the right reasons.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that you were able to break free from this life that you were given. Right, it wasn't the one you
Yeah.
chose; it was a default,
Right.
and
Hmm.
to be able to build something else out of it. So good for you. We're all works in progress,
Yeah.
but we all have a lot to learn, but we all also have so much that we get to experience along the way. It's not just about the destination. The journey is a beautiful thing itself. So I'm glad that you get to do that in relative freedom now. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you being willing to, bare your soul a bit, to be vulnerable, to tell other people kind of what you've been through, and I know it will definitely help some.
Yeah. It feels good. I'm glad we did this.
As always, I want to thank everybody that's brave enough to get on here and tell their story, so that they can help those that listen. And I hope that in listening back to it, you get a different perspective and can give a little more weight to what you experienced and find some more healing. If you're listening, you can support today's guest by leaving a comment of support on the website at shunnedpodcast.com on the episodes page. While there, you can find the date for the next Shunned Recovery Project online meetup, reach out for one on one coaching to get moving on your new life, or buy some merch and rep the show. Visit my other site, ex-JWhelp.com, for helpful videos and a downloadable roadmap of life after leaving, as well as resources like meetups, books, and a lot more. Join the Facebook support group called Shun Podcast. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and more as Shun Podcast. Leave a review on iTunes or other podcast apps for both this and the original podcast, This JW Life, so that more people can find these stories and get the help that they need. Donating equals loving. So if you love these stories and find them helpful, please support the show at patreon.com/shunned. And there's some rewards there, and it really means a lot to me to see that people support what I'm doing, and it helps me to do more. The theme song for today is No Hell Yet by Fair Voyeur. And as I end all episodes, love others, do no harm, and go be happy.